just looking back on it, I had a pretty incredible upbringing. My grandfather was pretty much my dad, and he was an incredible human being. He was a retired lieutenant colonel, and he was also an attorney. So you could imagine the lessons and the model that I had. And one of the biggest things, there's a ton of lessons that he taught me, but one of the biggest gifts that he ever gave me was that he never told me what to think, right? Like he taught me how to think. He always taught me to seek truth, right? And how to critically and logically think, how to look at things. And in the game of baseball, I would not be here without it. In this new world of baseball, it's really easy to get lost in things like research, right? Being evidence-based, data, numbers, details. And the reality is, I heard Neil deGrasse Tyson say this a while back: wisdom is the distilled essence of knowledge once you've forgotten all the details, right? So think about that for a second. He's distinctly saying that there's a difference between knowledge and wisdom. Think about cracking a whip, okay? If you think about going forward, right, you're never going to deliver the energy to the target, right? You have to think about pulling back. The first thing that happens, your hand goes forward, then it stops, then it pulls back, but the rest of it's implied. You don't have to think about the beginning, you have to think about the end, right? So when we think about the difference between knowledge and wisdom, knowledge is understanding things like the biomechanics of the movement, knowing the acceleration speeds of the hand and the towel, right? Knowledge is understanding the physics behind the crack of the whip. Wisdom is knowing how to get the guy on the left that's hitting himself in the nuts with the whip and teach him how to be the guy on the right that's cutting the can in half, right? There's a huge difference between knowledge and wisdom. And throughout this sphere of player development, okay, there are so many different avenues. You got skill acquisition, strength and conditioning, anatomy, biomechanics, physiology, data, not to mention the psychology of the player. Whether you're a hitting coach, a pitching coach, a biomechanist, a strength and conditioning coach, it doesn't matter where you fit on this sphere, right? At the end of the day, it has to transfer. But we have to have training that transfers at 7 o'clock. We have to get results, whether it's health, performance, that's the goal. And if it doesn't transfer, it doesn't matter. Like it doesn't matter. It's just noise, okay? 108, the entire evolution of this thing, the goal the whole time has been to help whoever was in front of us, right? To figure it out, to problem solve. And it's been an incredible journey. And as I look back, we've had a ton of brilliant minds, right, under the roof. We had every, somebody, credited in every 3-letter name you can think of. Guys from Cressy Sports Performance. We even had a sports scientist with a master's from Columbia, from a big league baseball organization that came and worked with us for 2 years, right? We've been able to develop some incredible relationships across the game. Donnie, J-Dub, Brent, Zach, Brownie, Ken, Freddie, Rick Strickland, just an incredible amount of brilliant people that we've met along the way and had an opportunity to learn from, learn with, share information. And then the lab partnership with Dr. Faree over at Movement First. Emily is brilliant. She's one of the most brilliant human beings I've ever met, and incredibly open-minded, which created an avenue for us to do all the amazing work that we've done to this point. And then on top of that, we're in the private sector, right? It's impossible to calculate the actual value of having such a large number of athletes across so many different populations, right? Like 12-year-olds all the way to big leaguers, with all different skill levels and zero constraints placed on what we did. Right, there's just incredible value in what we've been able to experience with that. And throughout all this time, right, we've done over 3,000 evaluations. Okay, we've 175 players a week, both sides of the ball, slow motion analysis, every system you can think of, tons of different data collection, tons of different movement screens and assessments, everything from movement stuff all the way to the Myers-Briggs. Right? Trying to figure it out. When we look at all of this information, it's really easy to get lost in all of the details of everything. And when I sit back and I take a 10,000-foot view and I think about what really matters, what's really important, it always comes back to movement. I mean, movement is everything. It literally creates every single data point that we see. Okay. If you have somebody that's dragging their barrel, right? They can't drive the ball to the opposite field. They can't hit the inside pitch. Their arm hurts. They can't locate the ball. All of that is a result of how they're moving. All of it, every single piece of it. And when we start to look at this, that these are different activities, right? Strength and conditioning, right? Doing a squat, hitting a baseball, throwing a baseball, but it's the same in a lot of ways. You're taking a weight, right? A weighted object, you're moving it through space, you're trying to do it efficiently, and you're trying to do it with force. Okay. And if we're going to train baseball players before we can make anybody move better, the first thing that we have to understand is what are good positions for our body to be in? And how can we efficiently move through those positions? And before we consider the task, we have to consider how the body was designed to achieve the task. What are the first principles of human movement? What are the things that we all share, right? Like there's so many differences. There's so much individuality in hitting and throwing and in all of us, but there are things that we all share that are the same. Like right now, no matter where you are watching this, regardless of the temperature outside, everybody's internal body temperature is roughly 98.6, right? We all have two arms, two legs, two eyes. There's a lot of similarities there. And one of the most important is that human beings are reciprocal movers. Now, this is something I've talked about a ton, but I think it glances across how the actual importance of understanding it. The first three major milestone movements for human beings are rolling over, crawling, and walking, which means that all of human locomotion, right, is about the base of our spine consistently going in opposite directions, right? Opposite directions at the base of our spine. Our upper body goes one way and our lower body goes the other way. It is a foundational principle of human movement. Now, in hitting and throwing, we always talk about how there's tension in the middle, right? We got to use the core. We got to use the core. Tension in the middle is created by moving in opposite directions. That's how you create it. Wringing out a towel is no different than how we move as human beings, right? And when you start to look, you're going to see it everywhere. It is literally a foundational thing in every activity we do, right? Watch his upper body go across his lower body in the other direction when he kicks a soccer ball, when somebody shoots a hockey puck, when somebody throws a punch or a kick. I mean, if you go watch Mike Tyson throw a punch, right, you're going to see his pelvis go in the opposite direction of his trunk right when he's about to deliver the punch. You look at bowling, it doesn't matter where you look. When you start to understand what you're looking at, like this had such a profound impact on me and such a profound impact on what we do, it's incredible. And I cannot stress the importance of understanding it enough. And as it specifically relates to our game, when you watch the greatest of all time, you start to notice, if you look at it with an open mind, if you get rid of any kind of preconceived notions you have about hitting mechanics, and you just watch these guys, right? Whether it's Miguel Cabrera, Hank Aaron, Mike Trout, Robin Yount, Stanton, it doesn't matter. You're going to start to see how many of them start close, step close, scissor, right? Or a combination of those. Their upper body literally slingshots past the angle of their lower body, right, directionally to the middle of the field. When you look at throwing, right, it most notably shows up through the recoil. Okay, now we've presented on both of these topics in the past, on the force of the kickback, the added deceleration, the increased force into the ball. Same with the recoil. When we did testing on the recoil, we saw a 37% decrease in elbow valgus on the sample group. 37%. Do you know how many guys felt better after they started doing that? Right? We also saw an average increase in velocity of 3 to 5 miles an hour. And since we presented on that, I think it was like 4 years ago, the amount of big league teams and college coaches and people that have reached out that have gotten incredible results just by telling one of their players, hey, why don't you try doing this? And then all of a sudden, everything changed, right? Everyone moves reciprocally. That's how we're built to move. But when you watch when you think about efficiency, right? All of the healthiest guys, all the hardest throwers, they move more reciprocally in tighter patterns than everyone else, right? When we throw a ball, when we hit a ball, yes, the pelvis is going to open when the trunk closed, but then the trunk is going to slingshot past the pelvis. The recoil is just the trunk coming back in the opposite direction at the end. And what that really tells us that it was a really efficient movement. Now, energy works proximal to distal, okay? This is something I think is so foundational and important for every single coach to understand. The limbs do not move the torso moves the limbs. Our arms do not move our trunk moves our arms. Our legs do not move our pelvis needs to move our legs. And when we look at the most efficient movers, their limbs are literally slaves to how their torso is moving. They're not forcing their back leg to rotate early. Look at this slide real quick. Look at JD on the left. Look how closed he is at landing, and watch how the rotation of his pelvis peels his foot into rotation. But it doesn't fully turn over, does it? He doesn't squash a bug there. Now, how about Trout, right? Same thing. He's landing square. The pelvis is pulling the back femur and leg into rotation. How about Miguel Cabrera? Same thing, right? In the most efficient movers, the limbs are slaves to the torso. When you look at pitchers, it's the same thing, right? They're staying closed the longest. They're not flying open, right? And then when their pelvis goes to rotate, when their trunk goes to rotate, their legs and arms are being delivered as a result of how their torso is moving. Now, when we think about separation, that's also reciprocal movement, right? Upper body goes one way, lower half goes the other way, but it's the first part of the movement. Thinking about trying to create separation is literally like thinking about going forward when you crack the whip, okay? The goal is closing the gaps of separation in the tightest, smallest windows of time and space. That's rotational rate of force development. How can we get the move over with as quickly as possible? How can we deliver as much force in a small window, right? Because we don't have a whole lot of time. We have to close the gap. Here's Vladdy Guerrero, okay, facing Chapman, 96.5. He's a pretty good hitter, right? He's one of the best hitters in baseball. Dude's like 22 years old, 96.5, leaves the bat at 114.3. Look at the trunk and the pelvic angle, right? Look how his trunk slingshots past. Look at his landing position on the right. There's a screenshot of the same exact swing. He's not leaking open. He's holding on and then getting his upper body to get past his lower body as quickly as possible. He's decelerating the lower half, accelerating the upper half, then decelerating the upper half and delivering the energy in the smallest window of time and space as he can. How about Fernando Tatis, another incredible, incredible young player? Look at that swing on the right. Look at his left leg. See how his left foot kind of steps across at the end? Look at the angle of his pelvis at the end. His pelvis is resisting his rotation. Look at his landing position in the middle. He's landing, holding on. He's closed. By the way, go back and look at this one. Look at the step across on this one. It's the same exact thing, okay? Now, this is one of the things that we tested, right? So we tested with a Waterbag the intention of the athlete, and we tested what if you think about your pelvis going as fast as it can, your trunk going as fast as it can, and then recoil, right? Now, this one was with a pitcher. The recoil far outweighed everything else. Gave us the best torso acceleration, best torso velocity, best ground reaction forces, best everything, okay? Now, with a hitter, pelvis was obviously the worst, but the torso first was better than everything else. It was better than the recoil, right? Now, at first, you look at that and it's like, wait a second, I thought recoiling was a good thing. Yeah, but it's not good for every single hitter or thrower to think the same thing. These are two totally different bodies. This particular hitter is like 6'3", 235, 240, runs like a 6'5", 6'6". I mean, he's a tight mover, right? He stops in small windows of time and space. He's built for that. And when you look at hitters, when you work with guys like this that are built like this, if you tell them to stop or recoil, sometimes you see their exit velos go down a little bit. Barrel percentage often actually goes up, but you'll see max exit velos go down because they're actually so tight and they can stop in such small windows that they stop too soon. They stop before they actually deliver the energy into the ball. So the best cue for this particular individual, the torso first cue, was incredibly higher. It's not even close, right? So if you're training these athletes, also understanding how to cue them, really, really important. Now, regardless of the tech that you have, it doesn't matter whether you're a high school coach, a college coach, or you're in professional baseball, regardless of the data you can capture, If you focus on getting your players to close the gaps of separation and get their upper body across their lower body with direction, whether it's to home or to the middle of the field, a lot of players are going to see serious improvement. The data is going to improve. Okay. Now, a couple of years ago, this was at Bridge the Gap. A lot of you people watching this know Dr. Greg Rose from TPI. He's a brilliant dude. And, we spent like 3 or 4 days together. We went to dinner. We argued, we debated. We had a wonderful, wonderful time, right? Because that's what we do. That's what we like to do, try to figure stuff out. And one of the things that we debated, one of the things that we argued, I was talking about reciprocal movement and its importance in deceleration, right? And how when the back leg works behind or anchors in, that helps accelerate the upper body. And then he said, well, wait a second. No, Bleak, what you don't understand is that the upper body decelerates the lower body. I'm telling you right now, the upper body decelerates the lower body. And that threw me for a loop, right? Threw me for a loop. Now, I had 2 ways I could choose to look at that. I could choose to say, you know what? This guy has no idea what he's talking about. Or I could sit back and think, well, I know we've tested it. I know it works. I know we've seen it improve deceleration sequences. But what lens is he looking at this through? In what world can both things be true, right? So I went home and I sat around. I was thinking about it a lot. And then, aha, followed by an immediate, holy shit, right? This was one of those moments that when you're trying to figure stuff out, that just absolutely blows your mind, okay? We do move reciprocally and it does assist in deceleration. But what we also have to understand is that we're trying to apply force into the ground. These reciprocal movements that we're using have to be done in planes of motion that are applying force directly into the ground, whether we're hitting or we're throwing. The trunk has to compress the lower half into the ground to create ground reaction force. So any of the coaches watching, you're struggling with a guy lead leg blocking, right? I know I've done a million different things over the last 10, 12 years trying to get somebody to lead leg block, whether they're pitching or hitting. We know the importance of it, right? But how do we create it? Is it just by pressing into the ground? No. We have to literally compress the lower half into the ground like a pogo stick and get our upper body to work into it and against it, right? Force doesn't come from the ground. It comes from us. We put it into the ground, and that's how we get it back out, right? And that assists in all of these deceleration patterns. Now, another thing that we got onto, we started thinking about this trunk thing. Okay, wait a second, this is big. So the brilliant Lance Wheeler always talks about how intention begets action, right? Intention begets action. How we think about what we're doing comes before what we actually do. The upper body, think about a jump throw. The upper body is initiating the move. If you're going to throw a punch, your upper body is initiating the move. It's pulling back, right? The upper body is also finishing the move. It's delivering the force. It's delivering the energy at the end. The upper body is the active piece. The lower body is reacting to what the upper body is doing. When you jump in the air to throw and your upper body counter rotates, your pelvis opens, right? And then when your upper body delivers the throw, your pelvis closes. You're not trying to, it's just happening. So that means the torso, even more important to think about than we ever looked at previously. Take that a step further. Where the T meets is the connection point between rotation and translation. Now, this started with a conversation with Dan Paff, right? He talked about the connection between rotation and translation, rotation and translation. So when we think about energy, right, we're rotating around an axis point, but we have to translate that energy out through the T. It has to be delivered. So if you're a hitting coach or a pitching coach and you ever had anybody that's like their body's rotating, but their arm is dragging. Their body's rotating, their barrel is dragging. They have a disconnection, right, between the rotation and the translating the energy out around the T. It's like your body is an auger, right? If you don't know what an auger is, it's a piece of farm equipment. The old school ones, it's looks like a T and you move it back and forth and it digs a hole in the ground. The new ones are mechanical. And if you, they have motors. And if you hold one of those and put it in the ground and that thing starts to dig and it hits a rock, you're going to get thrown around the outside of that tee. That's what it is, right? So the connection point between between rotation and translation is right where the tee meets, and that's at the top of the torso. So we started to look at this whole thing a little bit differently. So when we look at the body, we look at the upper body almost like the cannon, right? The trunk is the cannon, right? The pelvis is the boat, the legs are the ropes, and the feet are the anchors. If you want to fire a cannon from a canoe, you better stabilize the boat by anchoring it from both sides and pulling tension in opposite directions really, really hard. And this was a huge thing for us. As we start to understand the body, right, and we think about, okay, here's how the human body moves, here's how it applies to when we hit and throw, right? How can we actually do these things better? How can we do movement screens better? How can we do weight room activities better? How can we apply this to what we do in the bullpen and in the cage, right? How do we move forward? Movement screens are something, if you've heard me present before or followed any of our information, I've said a lot of negative things, right? Not about the process itself or trying to understand, and there's still value to it, but we have to ask ourselves, right? Are we doing it because it's smart, or are we doing it because that's what the book tells us to do? I mean, are active and passive assessments even the same thing? Whether it's active or passive, with what degree of accuracy does a slow movement screen assess the movement capabilities an athlete is able to express at game speed in different relative joint positions, right? With different types of contractions and velocities. And you also have to consider, there's something we've seen, I don't know if you've seen the same thing, but ranges change day to day and week to week, okay? And one of the things I always hated about it is that everybody calls all these things limitations. How come our most talented players that we've ever seen at 108 had so many of the same limitations? Right? Flat feet, lacking dorsiflexion, tight hamstrings, tight hips, lack IR, and their back hip specifically. When you think about limitation in the word, it means a limiting condition, a restrictive weakness, a lack of capacity. Yet all of our most talented players that produce the most force all share many of these same limitations, whether they're 14 and throw 95 or in the big leagues. We have to consider, like, I understand what the research says, but we have to consider, what if some of the research guiding the decisions doesn't accurately represent the populations we see, right? A lot of that research is on generic human populations, right? What's the average back hip IR in people that throw 95? That's a better question. That might be a little more accurate instead of comparing apples to bananas, right? And when you really look at it, the SAID principle, the body specifically adapts to impose demands, states that, like, adaptations in human physiology, they don't occur in a vacuum. These are responses to demands that are imposed upon the body. So the body is trying to build itself and organize itself, right? Whether it's biomechanical or neurological, with adaptations to help your body reproduce the movements that it's doing. So what if these aren't limitations? What if they're actually adaptations to the imposed demands of the skill? What if some of them are beneficial, right? I mean, I think adaptations for me, right, are a better way to describe what we're actually seeing. And I'm not the only one. You heard Ken in the last presentation talk about Dan Paff, Stuart McMillan, and he both helped to run Altus Sports Performance, which is it's in Arizona, and it's one of the top training facilities in the world. The amount of Olympians and gold medalists that have trained there is incredible, and they happen to see the same thing, right? If you look at most of their most elite athletes, right, you're going to see many of these same limitations. And years ago, they started to look at these things like, adaptations instead of limitations as well. But regardless of what you want to call it, you want to call it a limitation, right? A limiting condition, something that's restricting all these elite guys, or an adaptation, something that their body is just learning how to do. It doesn't matter. That's semantics. The real question is, how do we use the information that we're getting to create a better result at 7 p.m.? How do we actually use the information? Okay. Movement screens. So this process has evolved a lot for us, for me and for us over the last, 10 years, and specifically the last 5. Rather than only screening the athlete passively on the table, we assess them during the skill, right? And these lines you see on the right are something that we used to have taped on the ground. And now we've evolved the process, and we actually turned it into an actual product and a mat for how we look at it and how we assess it. Rather than spending 6 months trying to alter the adaptations of their body, we explore positions and angles to determine which ones are optimal for the individual, right? So if we're thinking about health and performance, we can spend the next 6 months trying to change their back hip IR, or we could just put their back hip in a better position for them to move it around. We could try to change how their lead leg or the adaptations that are in their lead hip, or we could just alter the angle that seems to make the most sense for that particular individual. And the biggest thing with it is that it's allowed us to connect the trainer in the strength room, the skill coach, but most importantly, the athlete. Using a process like this helps them learn what their body can't do, as well as understand it can do, and as well as understand what their individual positions of strength and weakness are, right? So rather than just testing them on the table, having nothing that's actually going to translate to the athlete to create the result, when you start exploring all of these different things, it helps bridge the gap between the S&C team in the weight room and the skill coaches, right? In the weight room, you can use it to explore width of base, femur angles, body angles, med ball velocity, direction, force production. You can literally use it to test and look at whatever you want. But the most important thing, if you want a result, if you want the guy to feel healthier, if you want him to perform at a higher level, he has to feel it. So when you start exploring those different angles, right, the trainer and coach can use it to test, but the player uses it to feel and explore what's actually working, right? Think about it specifically from a hitting standpoint, okay? If you have a player, right, and he struggles to drive the ball to the opposite field, and you're doing med ball testing to the opposite field, and you have him position himself at all these different angles, and then try different femur angles with his lead side, he's going to see, you can literally see the data that's producing the best results, and he's going to feel it. He's going to see if he's capable of actually throwing the medicine ball in the direction that he's trying to put it. Right? And when you translate it to the cage or the pen, you do the same thing. You can test exit velocity, direction, barrel percentage, throwing velocity, command, spin. You can literally test anything you're looking for, but the player gets to be the driver. They get to feel it out. They get to understand what's actually happening. This particular player on the left, Matt went to one of the facilities we did a certification for last month. And we left one there with them. And this particular kid is with a professional organization. He was drafted by a team, and he came in to not specifically work with them, but came in to use the facility, and they had the mat, and he tested it out. He went to number 4, right? Where was he before? 2 and 3. Yeah, he went from 99 EV to 106, and all of the feels were better. The closed stance is something he's been wanting to try. So if you don't have these things available, if you're not allowing them to explore these different things, how are they possibly going to figure out what's optimal for them positionally? Think about distance from the plate. How many people get in a batter's box and they stand in a specific location just because they do? Have they ever really put thought into it? Have they ever actually tested it? What if you have a kid with extremely long levers, right? And he's a super loose mover, and he's standing on top of the plate, and he's got pushy hands, right? And he continues to step in the bucket and fly open. Well, have you ever tested him at multiple positions, right? Relating to the plate? Maybe you could spend the next 2 months trying to fix his pushy hands, but if he's still too close to the plate and his levers can't get extended the right way, how is he possibly going to get in a position to do what he's trying to do in the first place? Right? So there's a ton of different things you can test with this, but there's a couple different examples of how you can use it to create some specific and very immediate results and adaptations for players. And, change for guys is often uncomfortable, right? But by exploring positions and angles that might be more appropriate for their body, they adapt and connect to it way faster. It's way less invasive, right? It's less work. And simply altering some angles and positions can create incredible results. But it's got to start in the weight room, right? It's ideal if it starts in the weight room because change is uncomfortable. A lot of times guys don't want to do it with the ball. They don't want to do it with the bat. But when you do it in another location, right? If they're just trying to feel how strong they are, how hard they can throw a med ball, it's way easier to get it to transition. So after months of frustration, correctives, and targeted mobility work, we stopped all of that and simply adjusted his back foot and stride angle down the mound. This gave his pelvis more time to clear, put him in a much better position to stop and accept force at front foot strike. He went from 88 to 91 with pain to 92 to 95 pain-free. Nathan Garza, S&C coach for baseball, University of Maryland. So Nathan had reached out to us. He was at ORU before, and he had read the book, and then he took the courses, and then he started to send video in, and this was one of the kids that, he sent some video. We were chatting about it, and, this is what I'm saying, like, this process that we've been going about for years by just trying to figure out how to put that guy's body, that individual's body in the best position for them has been ongoing. And we've seen incredible results, not just in our own facility, but, other places as well. And a lot of them just, we never had the ability to actually, provide everybody else with the same assessments that we were doing. So clearly optimizing positions is important, right? It's important. But what about how we move through those positions? How about that? We have to continue to think about how we're transitioning what's going on in the weight room, right? And what's going on on the field. Okay. We have to continue to build a bridge between these two sectors, because at the end of the day, we're trying to teach the guys on the right to be more efficient, more powerful movers in their skill, right? And on the left is the place that we can really learn and adapt how to do all those things. When we think about the weight room, a lot of people just think of it as a place to build general strength, right? But does that even transfer? And if it does, how come most of our highest exit and throwing velocities never come from our strongest guys? If it does transfer, then how come we've seen so many guys get stronger and we've seen their performance get worse? If the ultimate goal is results on the field at 7 o'clock, but our best players are not our strongest and our healthiest are not our strongest, is there a way we can continue to look at this to do it better? We've seen a ton of situations like this, right? You look at the kid on the left, 15, 5'9", 160 pounds, every single limitation in the book. Also happened to be 92, 94, less than 30 Newton meters of valgus on the arm, not very physical, right? Another example of a kid couldn't really squat a plate, right? 15, throwing, 92, 94. Kid on the right, 6'3", 220. College sophomore, no limitations, perfect body by a traditional weight room assessment. 81 to 83, ended up with TJ, incredibly physical kid, gets it done in the weight room, right? So we have to continue to look at these things and how we're evaluating what we're actually doing to get results on the field with our players. And when you start to talk to people around the game and you develop all these relationships, you start to hear all these same stories. Nathan said, I've seen guys that can barely squat a plate with 40-inch verticals that throw 95, right? The common theme is that they all move incredibly well, right? Zach Daycant, TCU, pretty smart dude. I've seen 250-pound freak shows throw 92 and the worst athlete on the team throw 97. It's how you sequence and move in your skill that ultimately determines the outputs, right? Dr. Fareed, performance is complex, cannot be linearly correlated with strength in the weight room. It's a multidimensional integration of motor coordination, motor planning, plane-specific force transmission, motor recruitment, neuromuscular firing, rate of force development, and efficient movement solutions. We have to start looking at the weight room as a way that we can actually train players how to move. Like, think about what we see in the game. We even see in the weight room guys talking about anti-rotation, because the guy rotates too much in his skill. Does this kid on the right need anti-rotation, or does he need to train the body to rotate more efficiently with a higher rate of force development to the middle of the field? Which one of those things is actually going to translate to the skill? Not doing the skill or learning how to move with plane-specific force and more efficient patterns? Specific exercise and specific stresses create specific adaptations. Okay, think about like marathon running and cycling. Lance Armstrong is one of the best cyclists, right, in the history of all of human performance, right? History of cycling. But he took up running after he was done, and he was kind of average, right? So even though both activities are good for endurance, good for the cardiorespiratory system, how much if he tried to train running or doing other things did it actually help his cycling? When you think about marathon runners and cyclists, they train by running and cycling. They train by varying those things by running more uphill, right? Running with weight on their back, cycling uphill, using different speeds. They train the way that they want their body to adapt. And within the context of exercise, the term stress is defined as an exertion above normal everyday functioning. For us, throwing and hitting is normal. But the biggest limiting factor in training baseball players is that we can't get in enough swings or throws to get really, really great at it. How are we actually training our body to adapt, right, to the requirements of rotating at such high rate of speed and stopping in such a small window of time and space, and moving as efficiently as we can? These are the same things. We have to continue to look at them, in my opinion, in the same ways. And we have to continue to bridge this gap. And as we've done that, we've gotten better and better results as we've closed that gap and bridged it between these two things. So how do we look at training that actually transfers at 7 o'clock? Well, stress the system through the same movement patterns of hitting and throwing in a variety of ways. Create reflexive, dynamic, reciprocal movements that elicit elastic properties of the body. Get the body to rebound and recoil in both directions, right? Get it to rotate fast and get it to stop, right? In the same ways you're going to do that when you hit and throw. Create rotational rate of force development in small windows of time and space through the same planes of motion. Use unstable loads. Using unstable loads, everybody thinks in the weight room like it's just adding load, you just add load. Unstable loads add a stimulus that elicits reflexive movements. You get constant co-contractions, right, that encourage incredible deceleration patterns. The water, as soon as you start moving that water, and when you change direction, it's still going that way, right? And it creates instability from above. So the faster you start moving that water in both directions, the better your body learns how to stop in small windows of time and space. Those seem like pretty incredible adaptations and important things when we start to look at like how we hit and how we throw. Rather than using a heavy load, you can utilize things like instability, time pressure, and pretension to turbo boost your reps. There's a ton of different ways that you can explore this in the weight room. When I say we need to move forward in the weight room, it doesn't mean don't be in the weight room at all. It just means let's start to think about how we can actually create results that really transfer instead of following these specific models that we're used to. How about differential learning, right? With variability and specificity. If you have a guy that struggles with getting into a good position at landing, and you're only training it by trying to throw bullpens, right? That's probably not going to work. You're not getting enough time in. And he probably can't, deliver the pitch the way you want. He probably has no command because he can't actually stabilize his pelvis, lock his lower half into the ground, and get his upper body across his body with direction. So what are other ways that we can actually strengthen the body through those movements and train it, right? All of this variability stuff, look on the left, hopping off of a box jump onto the mound, moving forward and learning how to move that water. That's helping his ability learn how to transition dynamically and produce force and accept force, but in the same ways. That's going to transfer. That's training that transfers, okay? You look on the top right, he's shuffling forward, right? And then doing the same exact thing, trying to rotate that water and bring it back as fast as he can. Maybe we can't throw more or swing more on a given day, but we can certainly work on creating dynamic stabilization in the forward move, right? If you struggle getting into, IR early, leaking with the pelvis, leaking open, arm gets stuck, right? If you strap a sled to your pelvis and you figure out how to get that guy to move sideways, right? How to move that weight and float that weight and work against that weight, he's not going to give up the ground. He's not going to start, rotating early. He's going to stay in a strong position because he's moving weight forward. Specific movements create specific adaptations, right? And a lot of the issues that we see are during forward moves, right? It's not just in the actual movement. It's how are guys transitioning weight dynamically from the backside to the front side. So when you start to train these things and you start to incorporate them into the weight room and onto the field, you're going to see better results. Another thing that we've really dug into is reaction-based training. Reactionary movements create way more natural reflexive patterns. So that reactionary doesn't just mean you're tapping your feet back and forth. If you're getting into a launch position, right, and you're ready to hit or you're ready to throw, and you have to react to an external stimulus when someone claps or gives you a go command, That's reaction-based training. And what we noticed when we started doing that more and more is that their body started, they didn't have time to make the decision or create pretension, right? Or muscle up. They just had to react. So the movement patterns were cleaner and tighter and way more reflexive. And that's why those boxes are actually included in the mat. Because we were using them a ton. And from a training perspective and a testing perspective, it makes a lot of sense to do it on a fairly regular basis. If you look at this kid on the left, right, he's tapping back and forth, okay, and he's reacting to a stimulus of a go command, and then he's trying to deliver that water with as much force as possible. See how he peels off and pulls off to the side? On the right, his back foot is working through a different pattern. It's working through a diagonal pattern. It's behind him. And he stabilizes it way better. And when he does his shuffles, he's in a more closed pattern as well, right? So all of whether you look at the data, you look at the movement that's producing the data, all things lead to this guy being in a little bit more angled position for him to actually produce more directional force with more stability. And when we tested it in the lab, out of all the reaction stuff we did, which was just feet standing still, simple reaction to go command, feet moving, so just taps up and down versus tapping in and out of the boxes, there's something different about the in and out of the boxes. We saw way higher max GRF, way higher torso velocities, way higher torso accelerations. It was really good. It was really, really good. And actually, when we presented this at Palooza, Dr. Free and I were sitting in the back and we were going over our presentation, and she's like, "Hey, do you want me to talk about how the patterns are affecting the cerebellum and how that's also improving it?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And she started to go into this whole thing on how having specific patterns in your mind that are not allowing you to think about the actual activity start to create all this neural firing and light everything up. And I had no idea. I had absolutely no idea. That was something I learned that day from her. It's important, but you know what I knew? I knew it worked. That's why we included it in the mat. All better movement. That's why I keep stressing the importance of how we move and understanding how we move. The better we get guys to move, the better results we're going to see on the field. So, question we always get asked is like, what products do you use and how do you use them? And something I've always said is that it's not about the products. It's about how we're moving. And there's a lot of products, especially like weighted balls that, if weighted balls, you have to coach them up really well. You can't just generically program them to see results. Like whether a guy throws harder or not, or gets healthier has a result. Like what makes the difference is whether or not the program or the drills or the balls help his arm move cleaner around his body. Like that's what really does it. So you can't just program them. That's a higher level coach. You have to understand what adaptation am I trying to create with the arm, right? Like for us, we don't just use weighted balls. We throw bowling pins and sledgehammers and 9 million different things to get the arm to move well and efficiently, right? So like I was never in on just general or generalized products. Water-based products, I'm all in on. That's why we ended up, doing a line of them. The water stuff, you don't have to coach as much to create for a high school coach or a college coach or even a professional organization. You don't have to stand over every rep. If guys are working on dynamic and reflexive movements and they're working on reactionary stuff and changing direction, you see good things happening with their body. They're building strength and stability through the right patterns of motion. Can you coach everything up with them? Yes, that's what we do. But if you can't, you also see really good results. So for me, if I could only have one product, right, training players, it's a Waterbag. It's a Waterbag. The water-based products are incredible. They create the instability from above that forces us to create stability down below. And it gives us the ability to replicate the same movements we use during the skill and develop skill-specific strength, right? Stuff that actually translates to what we're doing at contact or at ball release. And we can also use it in the weight room, right? Or we can use it in between, sets in the cage or in between throwing pitches in the bullpen, right? And we do that all the time. Blending those exercises together is a huge part of it. You can't just do it in the weight room. You also transition it, right, to what you're doing in the skill. And it creates natural movements. Speaking of which, little kids, one of the most interesting things I've learned over all these years is that little kids showcase the closest movement patterns to elite big leaguers. And it's not even close, right? They just move more naturally and more reflexively. So take a look at this kid's front foot. See that little step across move at the end? Take a look at this swing by Vladdy. Same thing. See that little step across move? Same thing here. Tatis. Same thing here. Same thing here. This ball's hit almost 117 miles an hour. Same thing here. And same thing here. And this is actually the video where I saw that for the first time. This ball was absolutely murdered. I mean, it still hasn't landed. You get it like, almost 500 feet off of Kenta Maeda. I think this was back in 17 or 18. I think it was 17. And, we were working with a player. And I started to think about, this player and Mike Trout, their bodies were very, very similar, right? And this particular kid, his junior year of college, he had hit like 260 with 2 home runs. Senior year rolls around. He's like 2 weeks into the season, also hitting poorly. And he called me and ended up coming into the shop. And I showed him this video. And I said, try to do this. And this is from that night. Look at the before and after numbers. 263 to 360. He hit over 400 after that night for the rest of the season. Look at the OPS, home run totals, 708 to over 1,000, 3 to 14, 9 to 16 doubles. This kid ended up getting drafted. He got drafted in the 18th round, right? If you ask him, he will tell you that watching that video and trying to do this drill literally got him drafted, right? So that's a cued thing, right? He thought about that. He saw it. He tried to replicate it. But it can also happen naturally. When we start doing these patterns, right? When we start moving reflexively, we start trying to move that water. Watch a step across. Literally the same thing, right? And the reason that we're seeing it is because the upper body, for that to happen, the pelvis has to stop. If you have somebody that can't hit the ball to the opposite field or flailing it off speed pitches, it's not because they're too far out front. It's because their pelvis is open and they can't hold their line of direction. Their pelvis keeps rotating. They're flailing at the pitch out this way, right? Which happens a lot, right? Like you physically can't do this and do that at the same time. So the thought of doing something at the end, much like the recoil, tends to help clean up things prior, right? So going back to what Ken talked about, as a coach, we have to understand there's a million different ways that we can create these end results, but it's about figuring out how to do it for the individuals and how we can continue to do it better, right? So it doesn't mean that if a kid does these water bag drills that he's not going to need AQ also, right? We still have to coach. We still have to figure out ways and problem solve to get guys better. But these water bags are the best thing that we've ever found to actually, create results with all of this stuff. So what else? Well, earlier we talked about how the upper body, how we view it as a cannon. And that was a really big thing for us. So we sat around and we were trying to think, how do we actually train that? How do we train that? Right? Like we are doing it in a sense with the water bags, but what are other variable ways that we can train the upper body to do what we're trying to get it to do? And then started to think about, well, there's a core velocity belt. It's a great product. It helps us understand force and feel. It helps us assist the movement, feed the mistake, use it with med balls, water bags, versatility, mount. So we took the core velocity belt and we threw it upside down on one of our hitters. And this is a video from that night. What we saw was awesome. It was exactly what we hoped we could see. Look how he's floating into the forward move. The decel pattern is really, really good. The direction is to the middle of the field. The only problem was that it was very limited in the ways we could use it. It was pulling everything against one side of his body. It didn't cinch to the body. So we started to explore all these different vests and try to figure out, are there any products that we can use that we can actually, move sideways, learn how to move sideways, use for decel stuff, feed the mistake, assist, resist, all that stuff, but specifically with the trunk and not with the pelvis. We couldn't find anything that we really liked that did a good enough job, so we created it. We are extremely happy. We went through a bunch of iterations with the product. Think about forward moves. Everybody talks about moving forward, but how often do guys really work on it? right? When you put a vest on a guy's chest, right, and it's strapped to his center, if you have a guy that has trouble hinging and you start anchoring him from behind and pulling him, you're going to see him counterbalance and hinge, right? You're going to see that. This is that connection point between rotation and translation. This is the upper body is such a huge driver in all of this. And when you start attaching it to an anchor point and manipulating it and pulling it around, you start to see some really cool things happen. Here's a video. We went to a college a couple of weeks ago before all the presentations, and I wanted to get some video of, what do guys look like normal in BP, and then what happens if we start attaching them to these, to the products or using the mat or whatever. So here's a before one. So these were 2 swings and 3 pitches consecutive, and there were 2 rollovers. And when you watch the swing, you're going to see the barrel drags. There's a disconnection between rotation and translation. The body's going, the pelvis goes, the upper body goes. The barrel's just kind of trailing and leaking behind. Not here. See how early his pelvis stops? See how much he anchors? This is a looser moving kid. Look at his back foot. See how much it has to anchor here for him to really stabilize against it, right? There's no more leak in the pelvis, right? His barrel is finally winning the race. And this was just by strapping him up to the vest and trying to pull him backwards. Here's another one. Again, pelvis has to anchor, right? Barrel's winning the race. Trunk's stopping sooner, right? Nothing's dragging anymore. We could talk about all the different things that happen in the data, right? The ball data, the body data, but the bottom line, you see results, right? And that's what really matters. You see more barrels, okay? We also, put it on another player. We worked from behind and then walking all the way around, stayed closed longer, hinge and posture got better, rate of force development. Now, did we have any, K-Vest or any biomechanics lab hooked up to him? No. But do I know that his rate of force development improved? Yes, 100%, right? If you watch people move, how they move tells a story about what's happening in the data, right? Bottom line, he hit the ball hard and more consistently. So what did happen in the data? This was actually pretty incredible. We brought the vest in the lab and we tested it. And this is that same kid I showed earlier. He doubled his max GRF on his lead side. Right. So because we're anchoring the torso, right, against him, he put it into the ground more than he had any other time on any other swing by almost double the force. And one of the other really interesting things was that the torso acceleration speeds were higher than almost every other drill that he did, even though there was resistance against his trunk. Right. So this wasn't the highest torso acceleration speed, but it was one of the highest, and it was being pulled against him. Right. So what does that say about what it's creating in the movement and the movement patterns? The bottom line is, look, by understanding how human beings move and how they're designed to move from the middle out, because there's a lot of differences everywhere else, right? Guys have different grips on the bat. They have different barrel deliveries. There's a lot of differences in us and how we move, different ranges, right, in our joints. But when you start to look at it from the inside out, and you start to base what you're doing based on, how human beings all move, right? Reciprocal movement, and how quickly and how efficiently we can get those things to happen, because that's what we see that the best do better than everybody else. It cleans up. The faster these pieces move, the faster everything else cleans up on the outside. And it's made an incredible impact on us and on our players' lives and on my life personally, and on all of the results that we've gotten with colleges and professional organizations over the last 6 years since we started going down this rabbit hole. The Torso Velocity Vest was officially on sale 2 weeks ago. We launched it at Palooza, excuse me. And it comes with a level 1 course on how we use it and how we use it to create different adaptations. The mat is also officially on sale with the course. The water-based products are also officially on sale with the course. And you guys can go look at picking them up on 108performance.com/shop. Now, obviously, because of all the shipping issues that we all see, We are in the process of waiting for some of those to arrive, and we did. So it's a pre-sale, but we did only order a limited number of them. I think we got like 50 mats and I don't know, like 400 of everything else. So if you are interested, I would highly recommend going and picking one up in the pre-sale. That way, as soon as it gets here, it shows up on your door. If you haven't had the opportunity and you've never gotten into our stuff and this is your first time getting to know us, a great place to start is the book, Old School versus New School. I wrote it back in 17. The application of data and technology into baseball, learning how to kind of blend the new school and the old school field generation. And then that led into courses. It's another great place to start. It's kind of like the book on steroids. So there's a level 1 hitting, a level 1 foundational movement course, as well as a pitching course. I want to thank everybody so much for being here today. Can't thank you enough. It's an honor to be able to do this for a living. We really love what we do, and again, wouldn't be here without you. So